That same cup you drink every day could support stronger hair, reduce shedding, and help your body fix the root problem instead of just masking it. Most people are losing hair not because of bad shampoo, but because of what's happening inside their body. And today I want to show you one simple thing you can add to your coffee that works with your biology, not against it. When hair begins to thin or shed, most people instinctively look outward for answers. They change shampoos, massage oils into the scalp, or search for the next topical solution. Yet hair is not produced on the surface. It is formed deep within living follicles that depend entirely on internal nutrition. Hair is a protein structure, and without an adequate and consistent supply of the right proteins, growth simply cannot be sustained. No stimulation, no device, and no external treatment can replace missing building material. Collagen plays a central role because it supplies specific amino acids that hair follicles rely on to produce strong, resilient strands. Glycine and proline are especially important, yet they are often lacking in modern diets that emphasize muscle meats while avoiding connective tissue. When these amino acids are in short supply, the body makes a strategic decision. It diverts resources toward organs required for survival and away from tissues like hair, skin, and nails. Hair does not stop growing because the follicle is damaged. It slows down because the body is conserving what it has. The condition of the scalp itself is also tied to collagen availability. Hair follicles sit in a matrix of skin and connective tissue that must remain strong, elastic, and well nourished. When collagen levels decline, that support structure weakens. Circulation becomes less efficient, nutrient delivery slows, and follicles operate in a compromised environment. Over time, hair reflects this internal breakdown through thinning, fragility, and increased shedding. Supporting collagen intake helps maintain the integrity of the tissue that anchors each strand. Timing matters more than most people realize. The morning is a critical window because the body naturally shifts into a higher cortisol state. If amino acids are not available during this period, the body compensates by breaking down its own protein reserves. Hair, being non-essential for survival, is among the first tissues sacrificed. Providing collagen early in the day helps prevent this internal borrowing. Instead of pulling protein from hair-related structures, the body is given what it needs up front, reducing long-term loss. Collagen is also uniquely suited for this purpose because it is easy to digest and rapidly absorb. Many individuals struggle to process heavy protein foods early in the day, especially under stress. Collagen does not require complex digestion and does not overwhelm the gut. This allows amino acids to enter circulation efficiently, supporting tissue repair without causing digestive strain or sharp insulin spikes. Stable digestion and blood sugar are both critical for maintaining healthy hair cycles. There is another layer that often goes unnoticed. Adequate amino acid availability sends a signal of safety to the body. Growth processes, including hair production, depend on signals that resources are sufficient. When the body consistently receives collagen, it perceives a state of abundance rather than scarcity. This allows hair follicles to remain active instead of entering a prolonged resting phase. It is not about forcing growth, but about removing the reasons growth was shut down in the first place. Coffee, when consumed alone, can intensify stress hormones and accelerate nutrient depletion. When collagen is added, that dynamic changes. The amino acids help buffer the stress response, making coffee less catabolic to tissue. Instead of contributing to breakdown, the morning routine becomes more supportive. Over time, this small adjustment reduces cumulative damage that often goes unnoticed until hair loss becomes visible. Hair loss rarely begins the moment strands fall out. It starts weeks or even months earlier with silent deficiencies and subtle imbalances. What shows up in the shower or on the pillow is simply the delayed result. By addressing protein support at the beginning of the day, you influence what the hair cycle will look like in the future. This approach does not promise instant results, but it aligns with how the body actually works. When the right materials are consistently supplied, the body does what it was designed to do: maintain, repair, and grow. One of the most underestimated drivers of hair loss is stress, not emotional stress alone, but the biochemical stress response happening inside the body every single day. At the center of this response is cortisol, a hormone designed to help you survive short-term danger. The problem begins when cortisol stops being temporary and becomes constant. Hair follicles are extremely sensitive to this shift. They interpret prolonged cortisol elevation as a signal that the environment is unsafe, and when survival becomes the priority, hair growth is quietly deprioritized. Cortisol directly interferes with the hair growth cycle. Under normal conditions, hair follicles move through growth, transition, and rest phases in a balanced rhythm. When cortisol remains elevated, it pushes follicles prematurely into the resting phase. Hair does not fall out immediately. Instead, growth stops first. Weeks later, shedding begins, which is why people often fail to connect stress with hair loss. The body has already made its decision long before the evidence appears. Morning routines play a major role here. Cortisol naturally rises in the early hours to wake you up and mobilize energy. This is normal and healthy. However, when the body lacks adequate nutritional support, that rise becomes exaggerated. Coffee on an empty system amplifies this effect. It stimulates the adrenal response without providing any building blocks to buffer it. Over time, this repeated spike trains the body into a higher baseline stress state, and hair follicles pay the price. Supporting the stress response is not about suppressing cortisol completely. Cortisol is essential. The goal is balance. When the nervous system senses stability, cortisol does its job and then comes back down. Certain nutritional additions help smooth this response by signaling safety and availability of resources. Amino acids play a key role here. They support neurotransmitter balance, stabilize blood sugar, and reduce the need for emergency stress signaling. When the body does not feel like it is constantly compensating, cortisol levels naturally normalize. There is also a direct connection between cortisol and inflammation. Chronically elevated cortisol disrupts immune regulation, often leading to low-grade inflammation in the scalp. This inflammatory environment weakens follicles and reduces oxygen and nutrient delivery. Hair growth is highly dependent on circulation and cellular energy. When inflammation interferes with these processes, follicles become sluggish and eventually dormant. Addressing stress at the hormonal level helps calm this internal environment so follicles can function normally again. Another overlooked effect of cortisol is its impact on nutrient depletion. High stress increases the loss of key minerals such as magnesium, zinc, and B vitamins. These nutrients are essential for hair structure and follicle activity. When stress remains high, even a good diet may not be enough because the body is burning through these nutrients faster than they can be replenished. The result is a silent deficiency pattern that shows up externally as thinning hair and reduced density. What makes this especially important is that the body adapts to stress gradually. People often say they are hoosed to stress, but biologically, the body is still paying the cost. Hair follicles do not adapt in the same way muscles or the brain might. They respond by shutting down. This is why stress-related hair loss can occur even when someone feels mentally fine. The signal is not emotional, it is hormonal. When stress hormones are supported properly, the body shifts out of constant defense mode. Blood flow improves, digestion becomes more efficient, and repair processes are allowed to resume. Hair growth depends on this internal permission. It is not forced, it is allowed by reducing unnecessary cortisol spikes and supporting the nervous system early in the day. You change the message the body receives. Over time, follicles begin to behave differently, not because they were stimulated, but because the environment finally became favorable for growth again. One of the most overlooked contributors to hair thinning and shedding is unstable blood sugar and chronically elevated insulin. Many people associate insulin problems with weight gain or diabetes, but hair follicles are extremely sensitive to this hormone. When insulin stays high for long periods, it creates an internal environment that quietly weakens hair at the root. Long before strands begin to fall, follicles start shrinking, producing finer and weaker hair with each growth cycle. Insulin is a storage hormone. Its job is to move nutrients out of the bloodstream and into cells. When insulin rises occasionally, this system works well. The problem begins when insulin is elevated day after day due to frequent sugar intake, refined carbohydrates, or poorly timed meals. Hair follicles interpret this state as metabolic stress. High insulin interferes with blood flow, increases inflammation, and disrupts nutrient delivery to the scalp. Hair does not disappear suddenly, it slowly loses its vitality. There is a strong link between insulin resistance and a process called follicle miniaturization. This is when thick, healthy hair gradually turns into thin, fragile strands. Insulin resistance reduces the ability of cells to respond to growth signals, including those required for hair production. Follicles become less responsive, less active, and eventually dormant. This process is subtle and often mistaken for genetics or aging, when in reality it is metabolic. Blood sugar swings also play a critical role. Rapid spikes followed by crashes create repeated stress signals in the body. Each spike demands a surge of insulin, and each crash triggers cortisol to bring blood sugar back up. This constant back and forth exhausts the system. Hair follicles suffer because they depend on steady energy and oxygen. In a fluctuating environment, the body prioritizes organs like the brain and heart, while hair growth is reduced or paused. Morning habits are especially important. Starting the day with sugar, sweetened coffee, or refined carbohydrates sets the tone for insulin behavior for hours. Even if total calories are not excessive, frequent insulin spikes create a hormonal pattern that works against hair health. Over time, this pattern trains the body to remain in storage mode rather than repair mode. Hair growth requires repair mode. Without it, follicles cannot maintain strength or density. Insulin also influences hormone balance. Chronically high insulin increases the activity of certain enzymes that convert hormones into more aggressive forms, particularly those that affect hair follicles. This can accelerate hair thinning in both men and women. What appears to be purely hormonal hair loss has a metabolic foundation rooted in insulin dysfunction. Addressing insulin is not a side issue, it is central. Another critical factor is nutrient access. Even when someone consumes enough vitamins and minerals, high insulin can block their effective use. Insulin resistance reduces cellular uptake of key nutrients like zinc, iron, and magnesium, all of which are essential for hair follicle activity. This creates a paradox where lab values may appear normal, yet hair continues to thin because the nutrients are not reaching the cells that need them most. Stabilizing insulin sends a powerful signal to the body. It communicates that energy is steady and predictable, not chaotic. When this signal is consistent, growth processes are allowed to continue. Hair follicles respond not to force, but to permission. They need an environment that supports long-term investment, not short-term survival. Small daily choices accumulate. Each meal, each beverage, each morning routine either reinforces insulin stability or disrupts it. Hair reflects these patterns with a delay, which is why cause and effect are often missed. What you see today is the result of months of hormonal signaling. When insulin is brought under control, inflammation decreases, circulation improves, and follicles regain the conditions they need to function properly. Hair health is not separate from metabolic health. It is one of its most visible indicators. When insulin is stable, the body stops sending emergency signals and starts supporting maintenance and growth. Over time, this shift changes how follicles behave. Hair becomes stronger, thicker, and more resilient, not because it was treated directly, but because the internal environment finally supported it. Hair follicles are among the most nutrient-demanding structures in the human body, yet they are also among the first to be neglected when resources are limited. Minerals and amino acids are not optional extras for hair. They are fundamental. When these elements are missing or poorly absorbed, hair growth slows, strands weaken, and shedding increases not because the follicle is damaged, but because it is undernourished. The body always follows a hierarchy, and hair sits low on that list. Zinc plays a particularly critical role. It is involved in DNA synthesis, cell division, and protein production, all of which are essential for active hair follicles. Without sufficient zinc, follicles lose their ability to produce strong keratin. Hair becomes thin, brittle, and prone to breaking. What makes zinc deficiency difficult to detect is that it can exist even when overall food intake seems adequate. Stress, high insulin, and poor digestion all increase zinc loss or block its absorption, creating a silent short hedge that shows up externally through hair thinning. Amino acids are equally important, yet often misunderstood. Hair is not just protein, it is a specific arrangement of amino acids that must be available in the right proportions. When the body lacks these building blocks, it cannot assemble strong hair fibers. Instead, it produces weaker strands or shortens the growth phase entirely. This is why hair may appear to grow slower or stop reaching its previous length. The follicle is conserving energy and materials, adapting to what it perceives as scarcity. Minerals do not work in isolation. Zinc interacts with iron, copper, and magnesium, and imbalance in one often disrupts the others. For example, low zinc can impair iron utilization, even when iron intake is sufficient. Iron is essential for oxygen delivery to hair follicles, and without adequate oxygen, cellular energy production declines. Follicles become sluggish and growth slows. This interconnected system means that addressing hair loss requires supporting the entire mineral network, not chasing a single nutrient. Absorption is just as important as intake. Many people consume mineral-rich foods, yet still experience deficiency symptoms because their digestive system is compromised. Low stomach acid, chronic stress, and inflammation interfere with mineral absorption. When minerals are not absorbed efficiently, they never reach the bloodstream, and hair follicles remain deprived. Supporting gentle, bioavailable sources of nutrients makes a significant difference because the body can actually use what it receives. There is also a signaling component to mineral sufficiency. When the body senses adequate levels of key nutrients, it allows energy-intensive processes like hair growth to continue. When levels drop, it shifts into conservation mode. Hair follicles respond immediately to this signal. They shorten the growth phase, extend the resting phase, and reduce output. This is not failure, it is adaptation. The body is protecting itself based on the information it has. Stress dramatically increases mineral loss. Cortisol accelerates the excretion of zinc and magnesium, while inflammation disrupts iron metabolism. Over time, this creates a chronic deficit state even in individuals who eat well. Hair becomes the visible indicator of this internal drain. Addressing mineral support without reducing stress is often ineffective, which is why results appear inconsistent. The body must feel stable enough to retain what it is given. Amino acids also influence circulation and scalp health. They support nitric oxide production, which helps regulate blood flow. Adequate circulation ensures that minerals and oxygen reach the follicles efficiently. When amino acid intake is low, circulation becomes less responsive, further compounding nutrient delivery problems. This creates a cycle where follicles receive fewer resources, produce weaker hair, and eventually reduce activity. Consistency is the key factor that determines whether follicles recover or continue to decline. Sporadic intake does not correct a long-term deficiency pattern. Hair follicles respond to trends, not single events. When minerals and amino acids are supplied regularly, the body recalibrates its priorities. Over time, follicles receive the signal that resources are available again. Hair does not demand attention loudly. It simply adapts to the internal environment. When minerals and amino acids are sufficient, hair growth becomes a natural outcome rather than a forced process. The strands that emerge reflect the internal foundation supporting them. Strong inputs produce strong outputs quietly and reliably as the body resumes the work it was designed to do. One of the biggest misunderstandings around hair health is the belief that results come from intensity rather than repetition. People chase powerful products, aggressive treatments, or short-term protocols expecting quick changes. Hair biology does not work that way. Hair follicles respond to patterns, not events. What you do once has little impact. What you do daily becomes instruction. The body is constantly collecting data, and consistency is the language it understands best. Hair growth is governed by long cycles. A follicle commits to a growth phase weeks before a strand ever becomes visible. If the internal environment is supportive today but chaotic tomorrow, the body receives mixed signals. In that situation, it chooses caution. Growth is delayed. Follicles wait. This is why people often feel frustrated despite trying many solutions. The problem is not effort, it is inconsistency. The body cannot invest energy into growth when conditions keep changing. Daily habits act as repeated messages to the nervous system and metabolism. Each morning routine either reinforces stability or reinforces stress. When supportive actions are repeated at the same time each day, the body begins to anticipate them. This anticipation reduces uncertainty, and reduced uncertainty lowers stress signaling. Hair follicles are deeply influenced by this internal sense of predictability. When the body feels safe, it allocates resources toward maintenance and regeneration rather than emergency response. Consistency also affects hormone rhythm. Hormones follow predictable patterns when routines are stable. Disrupted routines create hormonal noise. Cortisol, insulin, and growth-related hormones all rely on timing. When the body receives similar inputs daily, these hormones become more synchronized. This synchronization improves circulation, nutrient delivery, and cellular energy production. Hair follicles thrive under these conditions because they depend on coordinated signaling rather than isolated inputs. Another factor is cumulative depletion. Hair loss rarely occurs because of one major deficiency. It develops through repeated small withdrawals that are never fully replenished. Skipping support occasionally might not matter, but doing so regularly creates a slow deficit. Consistent habits close that gap. They do not overwhelm the system, they stabilize it. Over time, this stability allows follicles to recover their normal function without being forced. The body also develops efficiency through repetition. When the same supportive inputs are provided regularly, absorption and utilization improve, enzymes adapt, transport systems become more effective. Nutrients reach their target tissues more reliably. This is especially important for hair follicles, which rely on steady delivery rather than spikes. Irregular support creates waste. Consistent support creates efficiency. Consistency reduces decision fatigue as well. When a habit becomes automatic, it removes mental stress. Less mental stress translates into lower physiological stress. This connection is often overlooked, yet it matters. The nervous system does not separate mental load from physical load. Hair follicles respond to the total stress burden, not just nutrition. Simple, repeatable routines reduce that burden quietly but powerfully. Hair health is also influenced by what is avoided consistently, avoiding repeated blood sugar spikes, repeated cortisol surges, and repeated nutrient depletion matters more than occasional indulgence. The body is forgiving when deviations are rare. It becomes defensive when they are frequent. Consistency teaches the body what to expect and what to ignore. Over time, this shapes how resources are allocated. Visible change always lags behind internal change. This delay tests patience. Many people stop just as the body is beginning to respond. Follicles that were previously dormant need time to re-enter active growth. They do not announce this transition. They simply begin producing stronger strands weeks later. Consistency bridges this invisible gap. Hair reflects the environment it grows in. That environment is not created by motivation or intensity, but by repetition. Daily signals compound, small actions accumulate. The body responds not because it is pressured, but because it is supported. When consistency becomes non-negotiable, results become inevitable, even if they arrive quietly. Hair loss often feels personal, emotional, and frustrating because it shows up in the mirror every day. Yet it's true, causes remain invisible for a long time. What most people experience is not a sudden failure of hair, but a long conversation between the body and its environment. Every habit, every stress response, every nutritional gap contributes to that conversation. Hair simply reveals the outcome. When the body receives conflicting signals, it chooses protection over growth, and hair quietly steps aside. The most important shift happens when attention moves away from chasing symptoms and toward supporting systems. Hair does not operate independently. It responds to hormonal balance, metabolic stability, nutrient availability, and nervous system safety. When these systems are supported together, hair growth becomes a byproduct rather than a struggle. This is why isolated solutions rarely work. The body does not speak in fragments. It responds to patterns. Small, daily actions carry more authority than dramatic efforts. The body trusts what is repeated. When it sees consistent nourishment, predictable routines, and reduced stress signaling, it recalibrates its priorities. Resources are no longer guarded tightly. Circulation improves. Repair processes resume. Hair follicles respond not because they are forced to, but because the internal environment finally allows it. This is how biological change actually occurs quietly, gradually, and reliably. Patience becomes part of the process, not as a test, but as a necessity. Hair operates on delayed timelines. What changes today will show itself weeks later. This delay often creates doubt, yet it is also proof that the system is deeper than surface level fixes. Trusting the process means understanding that the body does not rush rebuilding. It restores in layers, starting internally and working outward. There is also empowerment in simplicity. When health becomes complicated, it creates stress, and stress undermines progress. Simple, repeatable habits remove confusion and reduce mental load. This clarity sends a powerful signal to the nervous system. The body responds better when it feels guided rather than pressured. Hair reflects this shift through improved strength, density, and resilience over time. Hair loss is not a punishment or a flaw. It is feedback. When interpreted correctly, it becomes useful information rather than a source of fear. Supporting the body consistently transforms that feedback. Instead of signaling depletion, hair begins to reflect stability. The change is not dramatic or immediate, but it is sustainable. When the body feels supported rather than stressed, it naturally moves